Good morning, guys, and welcome to day 6 of our 21 Days of Nutrition workshop presented by Kim's Prescription for Health. My name's Kim, and I'm your host as we talk through our various nutrition topics over the 21 days. So this is week 1, and the theme of the week is the basics. So this week I've talked you through whole foods. I've talked you through meal planning. We've talked about eating healthy on a budget. Yesterday we went over reading nutrition labels, and today is Saturday, which is Special Guest Saturday. So I have my special guest who will be with us over the 21 days to talk through IBS and IBD is what she'll be covering. So this is my sister Ashley, and she is also a nutrition lover. She has a nutrition degree. So I'm going to let her introduce herself and introduce her topic, and then we'll get rolling with our topic of the day.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Ashley. I have, as Kim said, a bachelor's degree in nutrition from Texas State University. I also have 4 nutrition certifications and 1 board certification in holistic nutrition that I'm currently working on. Hopefully finishing up in the next month or so. But I have also suffered from IBS for 10 years now, so I feel like I'm a bit knowledgeable on the topic. But for those who don't know, IBS is irritable bowel syndrome, and then IBD is inflammatory bowel disease. They're commonly misdiagnosed and lumped together, though they are 2 very different conditions. So we'll start with IBS and kind of break that down and figure out how to tell the difference, even though they are very similar, and then we'll talk about IBD and everything that's related to that. So for IBS, you have 3 different types. There's IBS-C, which is IBS constipation. There's IBS-D, which is IBS diarrhea, and IBS-M, which is the newer one, but it's basically just a combination of the 2, where you have periods of chronic constipation and then periods of chronic diarrhea. So IBS, for example, just affects the colon, but there's no actual tissue damage, which is surprising, because as a sufferer, you feel like you're dying and there's a lot of inflammation, but there really isn't. It's recently, so up until recently, it wasn't actually considered a condition. The doctors thought it was more of a mental state for patients, and they're like, no, it's all in your head, it's all in your head. But thank God, somebody finally realized that maybe something was actually going on. So now it is a condition, but it is sadly an umbrella condition where they just lump everything that they can't actually name under this one disorder. And symptoms are very common, like bloating, diarrhea, constipation, abdominal pain, gas, and nausea, which are identical to inflammatory bowel disease. But again, it's going to vary person to person. And then for diagnosis, it's really just whatever you tell the doctor is going on, because they can't physically find anything whenever they do tests. So it's a bit frustrating in that sense. Treatment for it typically involves lifestyle modifications, diet changes, and occasionally medications, but those are just for symptoms. They don't actually treat the issue itself. And there's no cure and no known reason for it to just randomly start out of nowhere. It does affect more women than men, but it doesn't have a preference in terms of your race. So the biggest thing to do to help with IBS is follow a low FODMAP diet, which I know we will cover in the coming weeks, and so we'll go a bit more into that. And then, let's see, for IBD, well, that one, the most common ones are Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, which Crohn's is more rare, but it is way more life-threatening. So as the name describes, inflammatory bowel disease, it's really just the inflammation of the colon, the GI, and the rectum. So everything in basically your abdominal area is inflamed, but it doesn't have to be full inflammation throughout all of it. It can just be patches. So it'll be inflammation, healthy tissue inflammation, which is even more frustrating. And so when they go in and have to do surgery, which I want to say happens 80+% of the time, it's almost always required to remove the damaged tissue, because inflammatory bowel disease is definitely damaging and causes a structural change in the actual intestines. Like, for example, ulcers, lesions, and all of that are definitely side effects of having IBD. You do have the same the same symptoms: bloating, diarrhea, constipation, but you also have joint pain, unintended weight loss, and that's usually because you can't eat, because obviously you feel awful and your stomach hurts and food putting food in the GI tract definitely aggravates it. IBD definitely increases your risk of colon cancer, unlike IBS, which is also very awful, but also diverticulitis is very common in patients who have IBD. In case people don't know what that is, it's little pockets that form in the GI tract and can collect bacteria and food, become inflamed, can rupture, and all of this damages the structural integrity of the GI tract, which can lead to leaking into the body, which is very dangerous. So IBD is really just an inflammatory, an immune response that happens when the body all of a sudden thinks that the GI is a foreign invader. So it attacks it, and it just constantly attacks it, and will eventually wear it down. So people who have IBD typically are more prone to developing celiacs, which with celiacs you can see the actual damage in the lining because it wears down these little protrusions we have in the GI tract called villi, and they help move things along. There's like a little wave that goes. And with celiac disease, it actually wears it down. So then the villi are damaged, and then you just have a smooth surface, which is not how our GI works, and it's actually very painful and very damaging to it. Testing for IBD can be X-ray, CT scan, endoscopy, colonoscopy, blood test, and stool test, because it is something that you can physically see with the damage. There is no known cure for it, but remission is possible with medications, and then of course dietary modifications that you can work with registered dietitians to kind of help with that, but they also don't know what causes it. So it's just can happen at any point in time. This one, I believe it affects both genders equally, but I could be mistaken on that one. But some other symptoms, but I wanted to go a little bit more into the Crohn's and ulcerative colitis for those who don't know, since it is part of the IBD. And it's really just a bit of a small description for it. But with Crohn's, it typically affects the lower abdominal region, so both the large and small, but can also affect the stomach and the esophagus. And you'll have chronic diarrhea, fever, weight loss, abdominal pain, tenderness, and of course you're very prone to abscesses, which can rupture and cause more problems. And then ulcerative colitis usually or typically affects just the large intestine, so it'll be the inner lining, but nowhere else. And then you have diarrhea, bloody stools, fever, and abdominal pain. So they're all very similar, which is why they're commonly misdiagnosed as one or the other. But you definitely need to seek medical help to rule out any other conditions or problems that could be causing it.
All right. So you said inflammatory and autoimmune with the IBD, is that right? And then, so would you follow are the dietary, I guess, considerations or recommendations fairly similar between the two conditions?
Yes, and again, they're going to vary person to person depending on the severity and what exactly they have. So it'll have similarities in terms of trying a gluten-free, dairy-free diet, and then, of course, autoimmune foods, which are anti-inflammatory, are things that you're going to try and eliminate and see if any of them are causing the issues that you're experiencing.
Do you have some resources for the it's like an anti-inflammatory diet or an autoimmune diet? Because I've already gotten a few questions from people with at least autoimmune, and then I know some people had just recently asked about anti-inflammatory.
Yeah, so the recipe that I linked in, it's actually a cookbook, but she has a whole section at the beginning that's all about anti-inflammatory. I have a couple of autoimmune books that I can definitely give you the link to for, I think they're all written by doctors and registered dietitians, and I found them to be incredibly helpful, at least in my journey. But I can do a bit more research and then send you that so people have access to them as well.
Because they're fairly different, I guess, in terms of autoimmune versus inflammatory or anti-inflammatory foods.
They're similar, so you'll see a lot of overlap, but I'm sure there's slight variations here and there because autoimmune doesn't necessarily have to be a pro-inflammatory. It can really be any random food that the body just doesn't recognize as being safe.
Okay. Well, that was good. Thank you so much for talking us through that. I'm sure we'll have some questions, so I will definitely tag you in those and fill those your way. I know I already have one, like I said, that was specific to autoimmune, so I'm glad you sent those resources over, and I'll be reaching back out to her. Just a reminder, always talk to your doctor before starting any nutrition or fitness regimen. This is just informational, so this should not replace the guidance and recommendation by your doctor. We're just sharing some of our information. Ash has done a lot of research on herself pretty much because she's been dealing with this for a while. So she just wanted to share some info in case you've been struggling and you don't even know where to start. These are some good talking points to bring up with your doctor just to get the ball rolling in that direction and kind of see if you can get to a diagnosis. But it sounds like the road to diagnosis is a long one, so it might take a few different doctors, a few different, sorry, there's a kid out here, a few different tests to choose a bunch of medications, diet, trial and error kind of thing. So talk to your doctor. Yeah, lots of medications. And just stick with it and get with your dietitian. And sounds like lots of dietary modifications and intolerance testing. Okay, the kid is out here and he is taking over. So I'm going to shut it down for today. Ash, thanks so much. We'll have you back next Saturday to talk about the FODMAPs, which it probably sounds like we're just making up a word. So just tune in. It'll be interesting and you'll get some good resources with that one. Thanks, sister. Everybody have a good Saturday.